support the social and emotional growth of all students and consider issues of equity when adopting that framework. We believe educators can and should lead equity and social justice transformation in their school districts, but how can educators cultivate the skills and consciousness to recognize, respond to, and begin to address institutional inequities within educational settings in particular? Participants will engage in this lecture in activities featured in Ohio Educational Association training and learn about professional development topics offered by OEA that are designed to guide training participants as they unpack personal beliefs, examine institutional barriers, and begin to respond to and redress inequitable school practices that are present in professional settings. Makia has been an activist, community, and union organizer for over 20 years. Her passion for racial and social justice have been the driving force behind her success. She grew up here in Dayton, Ohio, and graduated from Miami University. After leaving college, she became a union organizer for labor organizations such as Unite, SEIU, and the Teamsters, assisting thousands of employees to become union members. As a housing advocate, she worked to establish partnerships so communities can gain access to credit and capital. Before returning to Ohio, she worked as an environmental community organizer, engaging and empowering communities facing an environmental crisis to stand up for their rights to access to clean air, water, and land. Makia has been an organizer for the OEA for 9 years. She works with union members on building capacity, member engagement, racial and social justice issues, crisis intervention, community engagement, and professional development. Makia is a certified trainer in trauma-informed teaching, equity literacy, and restorative practices. She is also a co-founder of Honest Dialogue, which advocates facilitating discussions around the social impacts of race, racism in our communities, and empowering individuals to disrupt inequitable systems. She now resides in Columbus, Ohio, with her daughter and partner. Please welcome Makia Burns as our speaker. Thank you.
Well, welcome, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to the discussion. I'm so happy that I joined the breakout rooms before my presentation to get a little idea of like who was in the room, but then the things that you're interested in and you want to talk about. So I'm gonna get ready to share my screen. But also during my presentation, please feel free to ask any questions, whether it be in the chat box or unmute yourself. I like the interaction, I like the engagement with folks. So please feel free to ask any questions or give comments because I don't think I'm the expert in the room, but I will help facilitate our time together, tell you about what we've been doing at OEA, but then also facilitate our discussion. And so before we get started, I would like, if you are able to gather a paper, something to write with, please introduce yourself to the group in the chat box. Please put your name, your organization, and a book or movie recommendation. I'm always looking for new books to read and also movie recommendations, especially since we spend a lot of time at home and with others. So please let us know what you've been looking at or reading recently. But also during our time together, we are going to participate in an activity that we use during our trainings. And so I put in the chat box our Wheel of Power and Privilege document. So if you can access that, I give you a little moment to read it over, but I would also like you to fill it out. So once you access the wheel, look at all the categories around the wheel. In each category, this is the way society sees you. So I would like you to pencil in those areas or categories where you feel that society will put you in these particular boxes. You don't need to share your results with anyone. We're just going to use this activity a little later to prompt our thinking during our time together. So once again, if you could access that wheel and then also start to fill it in, I'll fill in the section where society sees you in that particular category. And then a little later, I'll explain the wheel itself. Just looking in the chat. Okay. All right, once again, welcome everyone. My name is Makia Burns. I'm an organizer with Ohio Education Association. We're going to talk a little about cultural competency and how we get from cultural competency to equity literacy. Once again, we're going to do a little introduction. We're going to talk a little bit about why we are doing this work as a union, labor organization doing work around social and racial justice. We are going to introduce you to an activity that we do with our participants to help ground their thinking in the work, but then also to start to discuss why we're here, but what can we do to impact racial and social justice. And then we're going to talk a little bit about why this work is important, considering equity literacy, do some small breakout groups, and then any final questions or comments that you may have at the end. So once again, my name is Mikia, an organizer with OEA for a particular 9 years now. I work with members across the state on various different issues. Usually when people think of an organizer, we work with members on membership engagement, but then also crisis management. But in the last couple of years, probably 5 years, I've been working with my colleague on this type of work on social and racial justice issues, mainly on, doing work on cultural competency and equity, also implicit bias, restorative practices, and also and also various topics around those particular issues. And then I'm sure you're aware of Ohio Educational Association. We are a labor organization that represent educators across the state. We represent over 121,000 teachers, support professionals, faculty members, in various capacities. And we've been around since 1847. This year, we're celebrating our 175th anniversary advocating for our members. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about our work around social and racial justice. And so, as you know, labor has had a long history of working within the realm of social justice, whether it be economic justice, including demands for our 8-hour workday or living wage, religious freedom, LGBTQ rights, or environmental rights. Labor history has been in the movements and working to push the needle on these particular social and racial justice issues. OEA over the last couple of years created a strategic priority. You can see on the screen is educate and organize OEA and its members to advocate for racial, social, and economic justice, to show that we are committed to supporting our members on these particular efforts. We looked at the low percentage of people of color represented as educators, and we asked how we can make a difference. We also looked at the fact that certain areas of population are dealing with insecurity around health issues or food insecurities. We started looking at what can we do to support our the communities, but also our members who are dealing with the impact of these societal issues. And so we're going to talk a little bit about the work OEA is doing around that. And then we also know that, to be a social justice union, we must not only consider the complex lives of our members and the challenges they face, but look at beyond what's going on in their school and the communities that they're living in. So we must see how the communities intersect with our larger communities and find out how can we work with them to fight on these issues, right? So we know when we fight for labor, we have to fight for our communities as well. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about how we work with our members to address social and racial justice issues. All right, so when we get started on this work, usually when either a member or local or our district come to us, usually something has happened. Either a staff member or a student or community member has said something that had violated someone's civil rights or something else that happened. And so they want to do something about it. And so we start getting to have conversations with the district or school about how can we assist them on this work. And so we let them know that this is a long process. Like we didn't get to be where we are overnight. And so it's going to take some time to get out of the mess that we're in, but it takes some commitment as well. And so we encourage them that, this should not just be like a one and done PowerPoint or professional development. We need to think about how can we instill these practices within the school district, but also long-term as well. And so it needs to be a commitment from the district to do this work. But we start this work with examination of ourselves as racial and ethnic being, like who we came to be. So we take a little time about looking at biases, and then also where you live and work as well. And then we examine the lived experiences of the students that we work with, usually around redlining, which is the legal practice of mortgage lender denying people access to credit and capital, usually based on the characteristics of race. So we spent some time talking about redlining, what that looked like, and how it's impacting our communities today. And then finally, we explore strategies. How do we address these problems, but also, build a capacity to make sure that one, we're reflecting on how these problems can be, but also how can we once again address them. But we also believe that the people that are doing the work should have a voice in how things are getting done. So we train teams to help us assist us to do these particular trainings. And so because we can't always be there working or assisting with these schools and districts, so we help train teams of people that can build the capacity within the district and keep the momentum going and going. So just let me see if there are any questions. All right, no questions so far. So usually when we begin this work with a school or a district, we have a conversation. We structure these as dialogue circles. They can be, it can be conflict circles, they can be restorative circles. Usually we say these are dialogue circles, a way to build community, a way for us to facilitate a space to help people have conversations with each other. And so we structure this environment by having this particular structure. This particular structure you could take and use in your spaces as well. But usually when we do this, we welcome people, we tell them the purpose, we give community agreements, we usually do some type of centering or grounding activity. And then we begin to introduce them to an activity quote to begin or to prompt their thinking around the topic, and then put them in small group breakout rooms to have more deep conversations. And so this is the structure. I can also send you an outline of the structures as well, and you can use in your spaces. And so usually we have community agreements. This is the community agreements we have. Because once again, we know people are coming in with things that they may not be focused on the issue or the topic at hand. So we want some community agreements to help guide us during our time in this space. So these are usually community agreements that we usually use. One that we try to uplift is that honor what is said here stays here. We like to think of these spaces almost like Vegas. So what's said here stays here, and the lessons learned go out. And then we encourage people to turn on their videos when we're in small breakout rooms. Once again, that is a way to build community and community with each other. And so here is the wheel of power privilege I asked you to bring up or to access a little bit later is in the chat box. And so this is usually the first activity that we may engage a group in. If you have not done so, once again, please access this and start to fill it out. This is the wheel of power or privilege. I'm going to talk about a little bit. Around the outside of the circle are just different descriptors or ways that people or identity groups or ways that society or groups or that society put us in. And so in the middle is where you are, is the center of power or the dominant culture. So the closer you get to the center of power is that you're more closer to the dominant culture. It doesn't mean that that's good. It doesn't mean that it's bad. It just means that it is what it is, right? So the people that are closer to the center usually have more power, voice, and choice in things. The farther you go out from the center are a depiction of people that feel maybe marginalized or have less voice and choice in things. So once again, please fill that out because we want to go into breakout rooms and have a discussion. One other identity group I like to talk about that's around the circle is a neurodiversity one. People usually ask questions about that. It just means that, the way people think and the way people brains are developed, there are differences, and that's okay. There's a continuum of how people take in information or how they, compute different information in their particular brains. And that has to be considered normal. And so there is a spectrum of the way that our brain develops or interpret things. And so example of different parts of that spectrum is maybe ADHD, dyslexia, or autism are part of that spectrum. So for example, I will be considered maybe neurotypical for that neurodiversity identity group. Any questions about this particular activity or document before I pull up the questions that you're going to use in your breakout room?
I have a question. How are we supposed to, we circle where we're at, or are we scoring this, or?
And so like, once you get your document, so like for, when I was talking about neurodiversity, I would be neurotypical. So I would just shade in that section that says neurotypical. And so for each group, I would go into and shade in the section where society sees me or would put me.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, so I don't know who's doing a breakout room. So if whoever is who can configure the breakout rooms, can we put people in breakout rooms of 3 to 4 people? And these are the questions. So what struck you about your will of power, privilege, and outcomes? Which identities have had the strongest effect on you, how you see yourself as a person? Do you experience any forms of inequity or discrimination due to your identities? And are some identities more privileged and are some less so? So if you want to take a picture, print screenshot or of this other question, so you have them. And I also will try to put them in chat before we go out to the break room.
I'm creating those right now.
Awesome, thank you, Emily. I'm just gonna, I think everyone is back. So just going to take a few more comments about, anything you would like to share that you talked about with your small group.
Well, our group was quite small and we were actually very comparable in terms of the different categories across the wheel. And in the very fortunate, I guess you would say, fortunate part about being close to the power center and the importance of being aware that others are not.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Anyone else? So, Deb, did you have something? I see you nodding. You're on mute.
Yeah, that's the problem with the camera on, because you can see wheels turning. And in our group, we talked about, having to communicate privilege to people that we're connected to. And I talk about that the center is it's real, but privilege can be complicated. So I always talk about privilege as being an inheritance for some people. In America, historically, if you were male or white, or male or white, you typically were given certain privileges, but I do understand that that doesn't necessarily apply in every situation. I talked about the privilege walk. So whenever I've done trainings on this, Makia, I've talked about, I always say their privilege is real and I'll go first, and I'll talk about the privilege that comes from having advanced degrees or fairly intact, fairly sane families, and how in any one given situation, the dynamics can be different, but we can't ignore that hysterically there are certain demographics that have inherited a certain amount of privilege.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Dawn, did you want to add something before we move on? You're on mute. You're on mute, Dawn. Don, you're on mute. We see your lips moving, but we can't hear you.
Oh, wait a second here. It's not me making that mistake, right? But I wanted to, our group kind of confirmed what Deb had to say, and our comments we liked about the wheel. There's a lot of factors that go into that we don't necessarily think about until you see all those factors listed out on the wheel. We did mention that in 2 days we have which many people may consider to be a privileged event, St. Patrick's Day, for the Irish. But since then, since the establishment in that, there's been a lot of factors that have come in. A lot of other folks have come into society, and as a result, they bring other factors and considerations into it. We talk about education, we talk about color, we talk about language, and obviously those are other considerations folks have when you deal with people, when you deal with them at work, when you deal with them at daycare or whatever. Someone was talking about daycare a little while ago. So that was our conversation. That's what struck us the most.
Awesome. Thanks everyone for sharing. In the essence of time, move on. I want you to show you this video. Talks a little bit about what intersectionality is. Once again, it gives a definition, or explains a little bit more about how that wheel of power privilege intersects and impacts folks. So let me know, give me a thumbs up if you can hear this. Can you hear it?
No.
So I'm gonna stop sharing.
When you go to share your video, there should be a little checkbox that says optimize for video and audio at the bottom when you are presenting.
There we go. All right, this should work. My video doesn't want to work. There. Can you hear it now?
Yes, we can.
What is intersectionality? Intersectionality is a way of understanding social relations by examining intersecting forms of discrimination. This means acknowledging that social systems are complicated and that many forms of oppression, like racism, sexism, and ageism, might be present and active at the same time in a person's life. Everyday approaches to building equality tend to focus on one type of discrimination, for instance sexism, and then work to address only that specific concern. But while the career of a young, white and able-bodied woman might improve with gender equality protections, an older, black, disabled lesbian may continue to be hampered by racism, ageism, ableism and homophobia in the workplace. Intersectionality is about understanding and addressing all potential roadblocks to an individual or group's well-being. But it's not as simple as just adding up oppressions and addressing each one individually. Racism, sexism, and ableism exist on their own, but when combined, they compound and transform the experience of oppression. Intersectionality acknowledges that unique oppressions exist, but is also dedicated to understanding how they change in combination. The roots of intersectionality lie within the Black feminist movement, with legal scholar Kimberly Crenshaw originating the term. Crenshaw felt that anti-racist and feminist movements were both overlooking the unique challenges faced by Black women. She stated that legislation about race is framed to protect Black men, and legislation about sexism is understood to protect white women. So simply combining racism and sexism together does not therefore protect Black women. Intersectional theory is now applied across a range of social divisions and also to understandings of domination, such as those associated with whiteness, masculinity, and heterosexuality. Intersectionality is not only about multiple identities, and it's not a simple answer to solving problems around equality and diversity. It is, however, an essential framework as we truly engage with issues around privilege and power and work to bring them into the open. Intersectionality means listening to others, examining our own privileges, and asking questions about who may be excluded or adversely affected by our work. As importantly, it means taking measurable action to invite, include, and centre the voices and work of marginalised individuals.
Okay, so I think that instead of doing another, because of time, that for the next circle that I'm just gonna pose the question to the group, and I'm gonna take a couple of comments from everyone, maybe 2 or 3 comments. So here is the next question I will pose to the group, and we'll put you in a small breakout room, but because of time, we're just gonna do a whole group discussion. So here are the questions. Consider the will, power, privilege again. What do you think the impact of this is on people who are different from you and from the mainstream accepted culture? How will the systems you are part of need to change for them to be inclusive? How does your position impact your work on the issue? And what actions can you take to support marginalized groups in your community? So if anyone wants to unmute, give us your comment or put it in the chat box. Everyone's so shy now. Maybe I should have put you in small breakout rooms. Anyone? Well, any comments about the video? The video, it featured Kimberly Crenshaw, and just like you know, Kimberly Crenshaw is Ohio native. She is from the Canton area.
Yeah, I've got a comment about the wheel. I was just typing, but I'll say it. It struck me that, first of all, it struck me how tight in most of my 90% of my my areas where I land are, closer to power. And then it struck me a little bit further that people who have a little bit of fluidity, particularly if you're talking about gender or sexuality or you know, different areas, economic wealth, how you would spend so much energy and time trying to reach and call that back towards the center, as opposed to someone who has it more tightly wound in the first place. It's got to be exhausting.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. We were discussing in a small breakout room. For me, I like the wheel just because it's a visual representation, and you can also have discussions about like for your different identities. Like you were saying, Brett, is like, you know, some identities have more power, some identities have less power or privilege, but also like how does that impact you as a person and the way you show up, whether in your personal life, but also in your professional life. But I'm also thinking about like how is that for others as well, too, like what power and privilege that they do or do not have, and how does that impact. So for me, it brings up a lot of good conversation, and sometimes this could be a starting point or just to have conversations about these different topics. We use this as a starting point for a rural school. We work with a rural high school in Southeast Ohio, where they were dealing with sexual gender identity and sexual orientation issues. And they said race is not their biggest issue, right? And so we started with this will to have a conversation about why intersection of your different identities. And for me, I bring this up because I remember there was a small group breakout, and it was like 2 guys and a woman was having a conversation, and 2 of the men were coaches. And they were talking about like how they was trying to get more girls to come to the weight room, right? They made it known that it was open and available to everyone, but somehow the girls are not coming. And so they started having a discussion based on this will. It says, hey, maybe they don't feel it is as welcoming as we think it is, right? It's far off, it's away from other buildings, it stinks, it's dark in there. So they may not feel as welcoming in this particular environment. So we may want to think about this a little bit more as to why, and stop blaming the girls as to why they're not showing up, right? Maybe we need to think a little bit more, how can we make this a more welcoming environment? So you can use this particular document in your spaces to start having those conversations about like identities and marginalization of certain people. And so, like I said, we have used this document in different areas to start having this conversation. They've been very fruitful for maybe thinking about like the marginalized groups in your community, but also how can we address how they have been impacted in our spaces. Any more questions or comments about the wheel of privilege, power and privilege, and also intersectionality? So I want to get some time to talk a little bit about the work at OEA.
Hello?
Yes.
Jack Burgess here. Yeah, I think both of these charts are really valuable. One thing I think we need to remember and realize that they're fluid. One changing. As an old guy, I can see the changes, and we can be happy for most of those changes. Another comment I would make is that there might need to be more emphasis on economics. A person who is a billionaire, for instance, will do pretty well in our society, regardless of gender or any problems that person may have. The door may not be open for everything, but money talks, and that perhaps should be a major factor in both of these charts, really.
Thank you. Thank you, Jack, for sharing. Yes, like there's a lot of different identities are not covered in the wheel for various reasons. I think I told someone, like I've used other different wheels, but this wheel just has more identities. But yes, like that is not in it. I think is age in it, not in it. There's, like I said, there's a couple of different ones that are not, adult identities are not addressed. But once again, it's about having the conversations, right? Let's have the conversations about marginalization and power and privilege. And then once again, how can we support, like they said in the chat, like how can we use our power privilege to support others who don't have it? So yeah, just food for thought. Thank you, Jack. All right, so just to get to the meat and bones of like what OEA has been doing around these particular topics. And so usually, just going back a little bit more, like usually when people, schools or districts or members come to us and say they want to engage in social or racial justice, once again, like something usually has happened. Usually, either once again, student, staff, community member has violated someone's rights or something has happened and they want to do something about it. And so we have a conversation to sit down with the school, the district, along with our members to talk about like what has happened and what also are your expectations, what are you really trying to achieve? If this is just like a one and done professional, training, professional development training, or is this something that you want to tie into your strategic plan? So there's a difference, right? And so like you can see on the screen, it's like, what are we really trying to do? Are we really trying to check off a box and say, hey, we address this issue, or we're really trying to drill down and figure out what are the root causes of the systemic inequities that we're seeing in our school systems, and how are we making sure that the most marginalized groups in our school systems are being felt, being heard, are being seen, and have a voice and agency in our public education. So, right, we have that frank conversation about what you're trying to achieve. Is it transformative or is it more performative? So we have that discussion, and usually we encourage them to do more of like a multi-day training around these particular topics, and then also have at the end organizing plan about how are you going to address an issue of equity and who's going to do what, right? Not just have a sit down about like, we educate ourselves about these issues, but what are you going to do about it, right? Like, let's make a plan, and how are we going to engage others in this plan as well? So we began with equity. A lot of people say that, they want a cultural competency training, but we believe it's more about equity. And I'll talk a little bit about that a little bit more. But once again, we see this as a collaborative effort between us, OEA, the local association, the school and district. And so when we are in front of the whole school or district, they see a united front, right? Like it's not just a district saying you must do this particular program. It's saying that we are partnering with the union and we're all committed to this particular, act of trying to root or deal with inequities that we may see in our particular school system. And so we let the district know that people need time, right? They need time and resources and support to do this particular work. So that may means multi-day trainings. It may means having a couple of more trainings or discussions during the school year. But you as a district or administration should give the staff the time and the resources they need to reflect, but also to plan to do the work. And so our services, as always, is free. And so we come in to do these trainings free because, one, we are working mostly with our members. So we offer the services free. We ask the district or the school to either pay for food because that's going to get people to stay. If you pay for their lunch and you don't have to go out and travel and come back to their training. So we ask for the school district to pay for their lunch and they have to pay for subs or things of that nature. But other than that, our services are free to do this particular work. And so usually when doing this work, we start with definitions because we want some common understanding of what everyone is coming from. And we use this definition for cultural competency. So if people can take a look at that and give me any feedback as to what stands out at you from this particular definition. So the definition is cultural competency refers to traits wherein a person is able to coordinate, work, or interact with other people that are different cultures and social backgrounds. A person is said to be culturally competent when they bring efficiency in terms of dealing with people of different ethnicity or backgrounds. And so we start with this particular definition. One thing that usually stands out as people is the part of it saying that bring efficiency in terms of dealing with people of different ethnicities or backgrounds. They kind of question that a little bit as to what are we trying to achieve if we're saying that we're dealing with people, right? And so we have conversations about that. And then I also bring up this particular meme. You probably see this meme on different around the web where it equates equality and equity, but they're not the same. As you can see in the picture on the left, equality picture, equality is about giving everyone the same amount of resources. But if you give everyone the same amount of resources, not everyone is able to participate in seeing the baseball game. But if you look on the equity side, if you give people what they need, not everyone needs a box. Some people need more boxes. If you give people what they need, everyone will be able to be included and feel like they are participating in the game itself. And then we use this definition of equity. We use two definitions, fairness or justice in the way people are treated. And because we're dealing with school systems, we use the definitions for educational equity is depending on two main factors. The first is fairness, which implies that a factor specific to one person's condition should not interfere with the potential of academic success. The second factor is inclusion, which infers to a comprehensive standard that applies to everyone in a certain educational system. And so these are the two definitions that we usually start our conversations about. And that is not really about cultural competency, but it's about equity, right? The ability to make people feel included in the process and that they have a voice as well. And defining equity again is the process of redistributing access and opportunities to be fair and just. And it's a way of being. It's the way you show up and how you interact with people. That's the way we talk about and examine how you are as a being. And then it's a state of being free of bias, discrimination, and then identity predictable outcomes and experiences. So we spent some time talking a little bit about these definitions, once again, grounding people in the same understanding to help people understand that equity literacy and getting to the root causes of things is not about just having a PD about cultural competency, cultural proficiency, or diversity training of multiculturalism or strategies to make your class more culturally relevant. It's about equity. right? And equity is about, in order to have an equitable environment, we must root out inequity, and equity must be considered and confronted to reach equity. And then inequities are more often about power and privilege issues and less about cultural problems. Power and privilege issues must be addressed to reach equity. And I think we talked about a little bit about that. And for me, this is a little bit apparent because of, sorry, I have to stop sharing because it's, you know, if you're the host and sharing your screen, sometimes you can't see the other people. I could see you. And so I mean, it's more about like power and privilege than more about the cultural problems. Hold on one second, I lost my screen. And I think I see this more apparent because of the pandemic right now, where we are having this problem trying to figure out how do we support the most marginalized groups during that pandemic, right? In the beginning, we was all on board supporting essential employees, but when, you know, the things hit the fan and you know, people started saying, oh, we're spending too much money, we need to get people back to work, all that went out the way, right? We also see it as a, you know, how people are feeling about educators. In the beginning, educators were, you know, the heroes, right? They're doing everything they can to get our kids educated, but now sometimes they are the villain, right? Because they are standing up for, you know, or addressing problems with, you know, how we are keeping kids and also staff safe in the buildings during the pandemic. And so it's, once again, it's mostly about who has the power and who have the privilege to make the decisions, whether than about equity literacy or cultural problems. And then also it's about equity is a lens or a philosophical ideological commitment to strategies that will help if people feel their situation, strategy will help if people view their situation with an equity lens. It's about redistributing material and cultural social access and opportunity. Once again, this is the hard part, right? How do we redistribute these materials and social access and opportunity when people who have the power and privilege don't always want to share that, right? And so that where we encourage our educators and also members to speak up about, you know, how these things are impacting the most marginalized groups in our particular society. And then we use this equity literacy framing network or framing question. What are the knowledge and skills I need to be a threat to the existence of inequity in my spheres of influence? Do I have the will to be a threat? Do I have the support to be a threat? And once again, we come in as their union, their local association saying, hey, we are here to support you. We have professional development that can help increase your knowledge and skills, but then also we will support you along the way. We'll help you develop a plan and any other maybe skills or resources that you need, we will help you figure that out as well. And I think I failed to mention, a lot of this work I do around equity comes from the work of Paul Porsky. He is a professor from George Mason University. He's also a founder of the Equity Literacy Institute. And he uses a lot of this work to say that, you know, once again, it's not about cultural competency. It's about what are we going to do, right? Like, how are we going to sustain these systems over the long haul? And you need certain abilities in order to disrupt racial and social justice inequities. And these are some of the abilities that you can use to do that disruption. So usually when we talk to folks, they are in this beginning stage in the recognizing even some biases and inequities and seeing where they lie. The second step is responding. How are we going to look at and reflect on the policies and practices that impact the most marginalized groups? And what are we going to do about this in the redress and creating and sustaining? That is for the long, right? That is the long term. And that's, once again, we talk to our school district and schools about, like, what are you really trying to do, right? Are we looking about this for the long term, or is this a short-term goal that you're trying to achieve? Right, so an equitable organization, not just one where we focus on individual people's needs, but one where we actively identify and eliminate all forms of bias and inequity and actively develop anti-bias, equitable policies and practices, and also cultures. I don't think we have time for this. 1 second. Because we have about 5 or 6 more minutes, but I will leave these questions up. So if people want to put in the chat box their answers, feel free to do so. But here are the questions. What are examples of things your organization does in the name of equity that might nibble around the edges of inequity, but don't create more equity? And what does the inequity harm? Or who does the inequity harm and who does it benefit? What do you think would happen if you spoke up about this? And what do you hope would happen? And what would a transformed equity approach look like? So because of time, maybe take one comment from folks to see if people have any answers to their particular questions or have anything you want to share. And I went over a lot of stuff in a small amount of time.
Well, when I mostly hear about when things were inequitable, okay, we'll stop doing that. But that doesn't address the equity of it. I mean, the inequity, because if you just stop doing what you're doing, the system's still there. And you know what I mean? Like, I just want people to stop thinking, well, we'll just stop doing it and that makes it okay. It doesn't.
Yeah. Right. And I think of it as a journey, right? Or a marathon, not exactly just a sprint to the end. I think that's what we talk about, like when we get together with folks, is like, what are you trying to achieve, right? Like, is it like once again, is it just a one and done professional development that we're trying to do, or are we trying to really think about systemic changes, right? If we're really trying to think about systemic changes, it has to be for the long term, right? And we have to continue to evaluate and look at our different practices and policies and think about how are they impacting the most marginalized groups in our community or sphere of influence. But that changes, like we talked about, that could change, right? And that could look different from year to year. So we need to always continue to be looking at this stuff and reflecting and reevaluating where we're at. Any other questions or comments? Just have a lot of problems like seeing you, so that's why I stopped my screen. But to kind of wrap up, we have worked in various parts of Ohio, whether it be urban areas, suburban, small towns, and rural districts, talking about this work, but also engaging our members on this particular work. We have done it in person and also in virtual environments. And so when we talk to people, we ask them what they want and try to accommodate them, but also encourage them and pushing them to like think about what is the long-term effects, what is the long-term plan, and how does this intersects or fit in a way, but also taking in the fact like there's things that happen in your past, there things are happening now, but then also what are we going to do about the future, right? And so the things that we learn is that planning, this doesn't happen overnight. Sometimes it takes maybe a year or two for us even to get to the point that we're doing a professional development with a school or a district. So planning is key. Bringing in stakeholders or members into the planning process to show that, once again, that we're all on the same page and we're committed to this effort. Celebrating achievements along the way is very important as well. And then also your environment matters, right? Making sure people are comfortable in your environment, people are able to spread out, have conversations in small groups, but then also in larger groups. And then also we have chart paper, like we like to write stuff, and we like to have it all up all over on the room so people can look at it and reflect once again, and also take it back with them, because once again, we don't think of this as a one and done conversation. You should continue this conversation after that professional development and after we leave. So we are very adamant about increasing capacity, because once again, I can't be there all the time. My other colleagues can't be there all the time, but we can also train staff and members to support you along the way. Any other questions or comments?
Hey, Makia, there was a question in the chat about access to the materials, and this might be a good opportunity for Emily to just plug how this presentation and all of Colera's presentations are saved for members and accessible on our website. Emily, can you just say a word about how people can access this information? Oh, and you're muted.
Sorry about that. So if you're familiar with the Colera website, it's lerachapter.org/Colera. If you check on the videos link and you're logged in as a Colera member, then you have access to all of these amazing presentations, including this one, probably later on today.
And a couple people are asking if the PowerPoint itself is actually going to be available. I don't know, Makia, if you feel or are comfortable sharing the PowerPoint. Some of our presenters have in the past, if you're comfortable with it. I can forward it along via an email afterwards if you'd like to.
No, I mean, I definitely can forward it on. Like I said before, some of this work, like especially with the wheel and the questions, please feel free to have these conversations back in your setting. I mean, that's what it's for. And we encourage people to use the resources.
If you haven't seen it, you've received several great compliments on your pictures and your presentation, your actual images in it. They really like your images.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I mean, you never know until you give it like, oh, is it, you know, or is it applicable to folks? Is it relatable? So thank you for the feedback, everyone. And
no, they really liked your images. They call it thought provoking, as a matter of fact.
I'm a visual person, so I love images. So I always put that information in there. I also want to say that, because I know there's people that, you know, engage with OEA members all the time. Please feel free to work to reach out to us. Like I said, we do offer these trainings to organizations that have OAA members. But if you have OC members, we do include OC members in our training. Once again, because we see as a collaborative effort, and everyone should be involved in this work.
And that's great for a lot of our members, because I'm sure we have several here present who have OEA members that as part of their organization. So that's great information that this is a great piece of feedback and another work that we can use as a resource for our agencies and for our employers and for all of us. So thank you very much for the information. This was a great presentation. Thank you so much for speaking for us today. I believe Mita usually gives the speech that, as she would say, Dawn will be sending you a cup, thanking you very much for speaking for us as a sign of our gratitude. Thank you very much. We truly, truly appreciated it. This was an amazing presentation, and we really got a lot of really great information today. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Makia.
Thank you, folks.
And for the rest of you, we do have a speaker next month. We have Mr. Ashburn and Mr. Casey, who will be speaking for us on the elections and what all of us have been seeing in the news on redistricting, whether or not we will or will not be having a primary in May on time, and how we are dealing with the new maps and all of the challenges to those maps. That's what we will be hearing about next month. So look forward to the speakers next month and look forward to seeing you all again. Thank you so much for attending.